crash landing and first contact, the screaming of twisted metal and the acrid smell of burning fuel filled Jackson's nostrils as his transport vessel carved a smoking trench across the crystalline surface of Nephis. Emergency sirens wailed uselessly in the cockpit as sparks showered from ruptured conduits, painting the cramped space in intermittent flashes of orange light. He'd been making a routine supply run to the outer colonies when the hyperdrive had catastrophically failed, dragging him out of faster-than-light travel directly into the gravity well of the Forbidden's moon. Now, as the silence settled around, the wreckage like a shroud, Jackson pulled himself from the pilot's seat with a groan. His ribs ached, and something warm trickled down his forehead, but he was alive. That was more than most could say after crashing on Nephis, a world quarantined by the Galactic Council for good reason. This was Cytherian territory, home to one of the most feared warrior races in known space. The hull breach near the cargo bay let in the moon's thin atmosphere, carrying with it an otherworldly chill and the sound of approaching footsteps. Not the heavy boots of a rescue team, but something lighter, more predatory. Jackson's hand instinctively moved to the plasma pistol at his hip and stopped. He was an engineer, not a soldier, and if the stories were true, no human weapon would make a difference against a Cytherian warrior. She appeared at the breach, like a vision from humanity's darkest nightmares. Nearly 7 feet tall, her body was covered in what looked like living crystal that shifted from deep blue to silver in the alien starlight. Her face was angular, almost feline, with eyes that glowed like captured lightning. Scars crisscrossed her arms and torso, each one telling a story of violence that Jackson couldn't begin to imagine. "Human," she said, her voice carrying an accent. That made the words sound like both a curse and a question. Crystalline claws extended from her fingertips as she stepped into the wreckage, moving with the fluid grace of a born predator. "You trespass on Forbidden's ground." Jackson raised his hands slowly, palms open. "My ship malfunctioned. I'm not a threat to you or your people." He studied her face, noting the way pain flickered behind her luminous eyes. "You're hurt." She paused, clearly not expecting that response. "I am Zephyra of the Eastern Reaches, daughter of storms and keeper of the old ways. I have survived battles that would reduce your kind to ash and memory." Her claws retracted slightly, confusion replacing aggression. "Why do you not flee? Why do you not reach for your weapon?" "Because running won't help either of us," Jackson replied, taking a careful step forward. "And because I recognize pain when I see it, regardless of species." He gestured to a jagged wound along her shoulder, where the crystal skin had been cracked, revealing flesh beneath that bled a luminescent blue. "That needs treatment." Zephyra's expression shifted through a dozen emotions in the span of seconds. Suspicion, anger, and something that might have been hope warred across her features. "You would tend to a monster? One of the feared Cytherian death dealers?" "I would tend to someone who's injured," Jackson said simply, pulling a medical kit from his survival pack. "Monster is just a word people use when they're afraid of what they don't understand." For a long moment, they stood frozen in tableau, the crashed human and the crystalline warrior, while the twin moons of Nephis cast their ethereal light through the breach in the hull. Somewhere in the distance, a night-hunting creature called, out in a voice like breaking glass, and the wind carried scents of ozone and growing things that had never known Earth's sun. Zephyra lowered her guard fractionally, though her muscles remained coiled for action. "You speak strangely for one of the conqueror race. Your people wage war across a dozen worlds, claiming resources and territory in the name of expansion." "Not all humans are the same," Jackson replied, activating a bioscanner to assess her injuries. "Just like I suspect not all Cytherians are the monsters the stories make them out to be." He met her glowing eyes without flinching. "My name is Jackson Meridian. and I'm going to help you whether you like it or not. Trust in the ruins of the storm struck with the fury of an ancient god, turning Nethys' crystalline landscape into a hellscape of cutting winds and electrical discharge. Jackson pressed himself against the rough stone wall of the ruins they'd taken shelter in, watching Zephyra pace restlessly near the entrance. Her crystal skin flickered with reflected lightning, making her seem more elemental force than living being. "These ruins are old," she said, running her claws along hieroglyphs carved into the walls. "Older than the war between our peoples. Older than the Galactic Council. My grandmother told stories of the first ones who built these places before the scouring began." Jackson looked up from the medical supplies he'd been organizing. The emergency treatment he'd given her shoulder wound had stopped the bleeding, but proper healing would take time. What was the scouring? Zephyra's pacing stopped. Abruptly, for a moment, vulnerability flickered across her features like candlelight in wind. "When I was barely past my first molting, human expeditionary forces arrived in our system. They declared our world's strategic resources, claimed our people were too dangerous to coexist with galactic civilization." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They turned us into weapons against each other." She settled onto the stone floor near the small heat generator Jackson had salvaged from his ship, close enough that he could see the fine details of her crystalline skin. Beneath the alien beauty, he noticed old scars that spoke of systematic torture and conditioning. "They took children," she continued, her luminous eyes fixed on some distant memory. "The youngest, the most adaptable. Broke us down and built us. Back up as perfect killers. I was 7 seasons old when they first put a blade in my hand and told me to choose between survival and conscience." Jackson set down his tools and moved closer, drawn by an instinct to comfort that transcended species. "Barriers. What did you choose?" "Survival, of course." "We all did, at first." Zephyra's hand moved unconsciously to a scar along her throat. "But survival came with a price. Every mission, every kill, took another piece of who we might have been. Until one day you wake up and realize you've become exactly what they said. You were a monster." Thunder crashed overhead, and the ruins shook with the impact. Instinctively, Jackson reached out to steady Zephyra as falling debris scattered around them. His human hand closed over her crystalline one, and for a moment, both of them froze at the contact. "Your skin," Jackson whispered, wonder replacing caution. "It's warm." Zephyra's breath caught. "Humans always expect us to be cold, like the crystal we resemble. But we are living beings, with hearts that beat and blood that runs warm in our veins." She didn't pull away from his touch. "You're the first person in cycles who has touched me without either fear or the intent to cause harm." The storm raged. On outside, but within the ancient walls, something delicate was taking root. Jackson found himself studying the play of light across Zephyra's features. The way her eyes softened when she thought he wasn't looking, the careful control she maintained over her deadly claws. "Tell me about before," he said softly. "Before the war, before the conditioning. What were you like as a child?" Zephyra was quiet for so long that Jackson thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible above the storm, she began to speak of crystalline gardens that sang in harmony with the wind, of family gatherings where stories were shared through touch as much as words, of dreams that reached beyond the boundaries of a single world dot. As she talked, Jackson worked quietly on her other injuries, cleaning and dressing wounds, with a gentleness that seemed to surprise her at every touch. When his fingers accidentally brushed an old scar on her wrist, she flinched, then immediately looked embarrassed by the reaction. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not accustomed to kindness." "Then it's time you learned," Jackson replied, his hand steady and sure as he continued his work. In the flickering light of the heat generator, surrounded by the remnants of a civilization lost to time, Two beings from different worlds began to build something neither had thought possible: trust. The hunter's pursuit dawn broke over Nethys in shades of copper and gold, painting the crystalline formations in colors that had no names in human language. Jackson woke to find Zephyra already alert. Her body tensed like a coiled spring as she stared out at the horizon through a crack in the ruins. "We need to move," she said without turning. "Korath comes." The name meant nothing to Jackson, but the fear in Zephyra's voice spoke volumes. "Who is Korath?" "My former unit commander." "The one who made me what I am." Her claws extended involuntarily. "When I disappeared instead of completing my last mission, the council declared me rogue. Korath hunts rogues. He also hunts human witnesses." As if summoned by her words, a distant howl echoed across the crystalline plains, not quite animal, not quite machine, but something that made Jackson's skin crawl with primal terror. Zephyra grabbed his arm, her grip firm, but careful not to pierce his skin with her claws. "Can you run?" she asked urgently. Jackson nodded, though his ribs still ached from the crash. They gathered their supplies quickly, leaving the safety of the ruins for the treacherous beauty of Nethys' surface. Zephyra led the way, her crystalline skin shifting to match their surroundings with chameleon-like precision. The terrain was a maze of crystal formations and deep crevasses that glowed with bioluminescent organisms. As they ran, Zephyra explained the hunt protocols in short, breathless sentences. Korath would use tracking implants to follow their biosignatures. Their only hope was to reach the interference fields near the planet's magnetic poles. There, Zephyra pointed to a needle-thin spire of crystal jutting from a deep gorge. "We can climb down the gorge wall, follow the underground river. The minerals will mask our scents." They descended quickly, Zephyra's claws finding purchase on surfaces that would have been impossible for human hands. When Jackson slipped on a particularly treacherous section, she caught him effortlessly, pulling him against her body for a moment that lasted longer than strictly necessary. "Thank you," he breathed, suddenly aware of how close they were, how her alien scent was becoming familiar and somehow comforting. "Thank me when we survive," she replied, but her grip lingered before she released him. The underground river was a ribbon of liquid mercury threading through caverns lit by phosphorescent growths. They followed it for hours, wading through shallows that numbed their feet with cold until the sound of pursuit grew distant. Finally, they stopped to rest in a chamber where the river widened into a still pool. Exhaustion and adrenaline had left them both shaking, and when Zephyra stumbled, Jackson caught her as she had caught him. "I won't let him take you back," Jackson said fiercely, surprising himself with the intensity of his conviction. Zephyra looked up at him, her luminous eyes reflecting the cave's ethereal light. "Why? You barely know me. Your people and mine are enemies." "Because I see who you really are," Jackson replied, his hands coming up to frame her angular face. "Not the weapon they made you, but the person you chose to become." The space between them seemed to contract, filled with possibilities neither had dared to imagine. When Zephyra leaned into his touch, her crystalline skin warm against his palms, Jackson felt something shift in the fundamental structure of his universe. "Korath will never stop hunting," she whispered. "As long as I exist, you'll be in danger." "Then we'd better make sure the danger is worth it," Jackson replied, and before either of them could think better of it, he closed the distance between them. Her lips were soft despite her alien nature, and when she kissed him back with careful precision, as if afraid her strength might hurt him, Jackson tasted starlight and ozone and something uniquely Zephyra. The sound of the underground river seemed to fade, leaving only the hammering of two hearts learning to beat in synchrony. Confessions. Under Starlight, hidden cave Zephyra led them to was a cathedral of living crystal, its walls pulsing with soft bioluminescence that matched the rhythm of their breathing. They were safe here, she assured him, The cave's unique mineral composition would shield them from Korath's sensors for at least a few days. That's O.N. Watched her move through the space with unconscious grace, her crystalline skin picking up and reflecting the ambient light until she seemed to glow from within. The events of the past few days had changed something fundamental between them, and he found himself studying her with new eyes. "You're staring," Zephyra observed without turning around, though he could hear the smile in her voice. "Guilty as charged," Jackson admitted, settling beside the small fire they'd built near the cave's entrance. "I'm trying to figure out how I got so lucky." Zephyra turned to face him, her expression growing serious. "Lucky? Jackson, I am everything the stories say and worse. The things I've done, the people I've killed." She wrapped her arms around herself. "When this is over, when you return to your people, you'll understand what a mistake this has been." Jackson reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers despite the difference in their anatomy. "Tell me," he said simply, "all of it. Let me decide what I can live with." What followed was a confession that lasted deep into the night. Zephyra spoke of missions that had taken her to a dozen worlds, of targets both military and civilian, of the careful emotional numbness required to function as an instrument of war. She told him about the first time she'd hesitated before a kill, and how Korath's punishment had ensured she never hesitated again. "There was a human colony on Zarian Prime," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Families, children. The council said they were military assets, legitimate targets. I knew better, but I followed orders anyway." Tears that glowed like liquid starlight traced paths down her cheeks. "I can still hear their voices in my dreams." Jackson pulled her closer, letting her alien warmth seep into his bones. "What changed? What made you stop?" "You," she said, looking up at him with eyes that held galaxies. "Not you specifically, but what you represent. When I saw you tend to my wounds without fear, when you chose compassion over self-preservation, it reminded me that there were other ways to be strong." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the crystal walls. Outside, Nephis' twin moons reached their zenith, painting the cave entrance in silver light. Jackson found himself sharing his own story, the loss of his family in a transport accident, his choice to become an engineer rather than a soldier, his belief that building was more important than destroying. "I was supposed to be on a colony ship to Andromeda," he confessed, "but I couldn't leave knowing that there were still people like you out there, caught between impossible choices." Zephyra's claws retracted completely as she cupped his face in her hands. "You make me want to believe in redemption again." When she kissed him this time, it was with a desperate hunger that spoke of years of emotional starvation. Jackson responded with equal intensity, his hands tracing the unique geography of her crystalline skin, learning the places where hardness gave way to softness, where alien biology mirrored human vulnerability. "Are you certain?" Zephyra whispered against his lips, her breath warm and sweet. "Once we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be choosing exile from your own species." "I chose you the moment I decided to stay and help instead of running," Jackson replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Everything else is just details." They made love with the careful reverence of two beings, discovering that the universe was far more beautiful and terrifying than either had imagined. Her crystalline skin was warm silk beneath his hands, and when she arched against him with a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, Jackson knew he had found something worth fighting for. Afterward, they lay entwined in the crystal chamber's ethereal light, Zephyra's head on Jackson's chest as he traced patterns on her shoulders. The scars that covered her body no longer looked like marks of violence, but like a map of survival, each one a testament to her strength. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now we write a new story," Jackson replied, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. "One where monsters become heroes, and enemies become lovers. Building tomorrow 6 months after their escape from Omega-7, the Sanctuary Station was a marvel of hybrid technology floating at the edge of the Helix Nebula. Built from salvaged corporate vessels and powered by controlled dimensional tiers, it represented something entirely new in galactic civilization, a place where energy beings and matter-based species could coexist as equals. Dex stood in the station's central hub, watching through the massive viewports as another group of refugees arrived. This transport carried 3 more Voidborn who had been freed from dimensional prisons, along with a family of crystalline entities fleeing corporate exploitation and a group of human scientists seeking asylum from military conscription. The Council is not pleased with our growing influence, Nyxara observed, materializing beside him in the form that had become her preferred manifestation, fully solid, but retaining the luminous skin that marked her alien nature. Ambassador Kellen has been sending increasingly threatening communiques. Let them threaten, Dex replied, his arm sliding around her waist with practiced ease. Sanctuary Station exists in neutral space, protected by salvage rights and refugee protocols. As long as we don't interfere with major trade routes or threaten established colonies, they can't touch us legally. Through the viewport, they watched as the newest arrivals disembarked from the transport. The void-born refugees flickered between energy and matter states, still learning to maintain physical coherence outside their native realm. The crystalline family moved with musical grace, their forms chiming softly as they communicated through harmonic resonance. The human scientists looked around with expressions of wonder and relief at finding a place where their radical research wouldn't be weaponized. Dr. Torres? A voice called from behind them. Dex turned to see Miranda Cole, one of the first humans, to join their growing community, approaching with a datapad in hand. The quantum resonance chambers are ready for the next batch of dimensional rescues. Nyxara's frequency modulations have stabilized the void interfaces enough to attempt 3 simultaneous extractions. Excellent work, Dex replied, accepting the datapad and reviewing the extraction protocols they developed over months of careful experimentation. Have the medical teams standing by. Some of the older prisoners may need time to readjust to the possibility of physical form. As Miranda departed to oversee the preparations, Nyxara leaned closer to Dex, her energy field warm against his side. Sometimes I can barely believe this is real, she said softly. A place where Voidborn can learn to touch, where humans can explore consciousness beyond their physical forms, where species can choose cooperation over conquest. It's just the beginning, Dex assured her, pulling up holographic displays of the station's expanding sections. The agricultural pods are producing hybrid foods that can nourish both energy and matter-based beings. The research labs are making breakthroughs in dimensional physics that could revolutionize interstellar travel. And the cultural exchange programs? He trailed off as Nyxara's lips curved in the smile that never failed to make his heart skip. Even after months of living together, her otherworldly beauty still took his breath away, the way starlight seemed to flow beneath her skin, how her eyes held depths that reminded him of nebulae being born. You're staring again, she said teasingly, the same words she'd spoken in the crystal cave on Nethys all those months ago. Still guilty as charged, Dex replied, echoing his response from that night. And I plan to keep staring for the next few centuries, assuming you'll have me. Nyxara's expression grew serious, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. Centuries? Dex, my people are functionally immortal. Are you prepared for that kind of commitment? Ask me again in 100 years, Dex said, pulling her closer for a kiss that tasted of ozone and infinite possibility. Their moment was interrupted by excited voices from the docking bay. Rushing to investigate, they found the newest void-born refugees had successfully maintained coherent forms and were now experiencing physical sensation for the first time in millennia. One of them, an ancient being whose energy patterns spoke of eons of existence, was weeping tears of pure light as a human child offered her a simple flower. "This is what we're building," Ixara whispered, her hand finding Dex's as they watched the scene unfold. Not just a refuge, but proof that the universe is vast enough for all kinds of consciousness to flourish. Dex nodded, thinking of the reports they'd been receiving from across the galaxy, other sanctuaries being established, new alliances forming between previously hostile species, the slow but steady breakdown of the fear-based policies that had kept different forms of life separated for so long. The future stretched before them like an uncharted dimension, full of possibilities that neither human nor voidborn could have achieved alone. But together, with love as their guide and understanding as their goal, they were writing a new chapter in the story of galactic civilization, one where the only monsters were ignorance and fear, and where connection could bridge any gap, no matter how vast. As the station's artificial day cycle dimmed to evening, Dex and Nixara retreated to their private quarters, a space that perfectly blended human comfort with void-born aesthetics. Their bed was surrounded by floating crystals that resonated with Nixara's energy patterns, creating a light show that was both beautiful and deeply personal. "Tomorrow we free 12 more voidborn from dimensional prison," Ixara said as they prepared for sleep, her form shifting to the semi-ethereal state she preferred for rest. "And next week, the Etherean Collective wants to establish a trade agreement." "Busy times ahead," Dex agreed, pulling her close as her energy field settled around them like a warm blanket. "But we'll face them together." "Together," Nixara echoed, her voice carrying harmonics of contentment and love. "I like the sound of that word in your language. It encompasses so much partnership, unity, choice." As they drifted toward sleep, Dex reflected on how much his life had changed since that day. He'd torn a hole in reality and found something more precious than any scientific discovery, a love that transcended the boundaries between matter and energy, between species and dimensions, between what was and what could be.